Welcome to this session of the 2011 Sydney Writers' Festival. My name's Stephen Romay. I'm the literary editor of the Australian newspaper. And with me today, I'm very pleased to have Téa Obreht, a young American novelist of former Yugoslavian background, who, if you follow the literary news at all, you'll have heard of, because her debut novel, The Tiger's Wife, has been winning rave reviews around the world. I know that we normally don't clap people until the end of a session, but this is Téa's first visit to Australia, so I thought we might welcome her.
Thank you.
What we're going to do is, I'm just going to talk to Téa very briefly about being in Australia, and then she's going to do a reading from The Tiger's Wife to give you a feel for the book. Welcome, this is your first time.
It is, yeah, it's been wonderful.
I know people, get off a plane and they're asked, how do they think Australia is? But how do you think Australia is?
Oh my I love it, and I knew that I would love it. Yesterday was really my only free day, and we went to a Blue Mountains tour and to Featherdale Park, which was just, all my dreams have come true in just one day, and there were koalas, and for me there is nothing better than a koala, really, and so I got to touch one, which was wonderful. So far so good in Australia. I want to move here immediately.
You don't know how so far so good, giving koalas reputations, really.
I can just see the headline this morning, writer does not appear mauled by koala.
So, welcome, and what we're going to do, as I said, is Téa is going to read from the opening of her novel, just to give you a feel for her writing.
Yes, thank you. So this is the opening, just straight from the very beginning of the book. In my earliest memory, my grandfather is bald as a stone, and he takes me to see the tigers. He puts on his hat, his big buttoned raincoat, and I wear my lacquered shoes and velvet dress. It is autumn, and I am 4 years old. The certainty of this process, my grandfather's hand, the bright hiss of the trolley, the dampness of the morning, the crowded walk up the hill to the Citadel Park. Always in my grandfather's breast pocket, the Jungle Book with its gold leaf cover and old yellow pages. I am not allowed to hold it, but it will stay open on his knee all afternoon while he recites the passages to me. Even though my grandfather is not wearing his stethoscope or white coat, the lady at the ticket counter in the entrance shed calls him Doctor. Then there is the popcorn cart, the umbrella stand, a small kiosk with postcards and pictures. Down the stairs and past the aviary where the sharp-eared owls sleep, through the garden that runs the length of the Citadel wall framed with cages. Once there was a king here, a sultan, his janissaries. Now the cannon windows facing the street hold blocked-off troughs filled with tepid water. The cage bars curve out, rusted orange. In his free hand, my grandfather is carrying the blue bag my grandma has prepared for us. In it, 6-day-old cabbage heads for the hippopotamus, carrots and celery for the sheep and deer, and the bull moose, who is a kind of phenomenon. In his pocket, my grandfather has hidden some sugar cubes for the pony that pulls the park carriage. I will not remember this as sentimentality, but as greatness. The tigers live in an outer moat of the fortress. We climb the castle stairs, past the water birds and the sweating windows of the monkey house, past the wolf growing his winter coat. We pass the bearded vultures and then the bears, asleep all day, smelling of damp earth and the death of something. My grandfather picks me up and props my feet against the handrail so I can look down and see the tigers in the moat. My grandfather never refers to the tiger's wife by name. His arm is around me, and my feet are on the handrail, and my grandfather might say, I once knew a girl who loved tigers so much she almost became one herself. Because I am little, and my love of tigers comes directly from him, I believe he is talking about me, offering me a fairy tale in which I can imagine myself and will for years. The cages face a courtyard, and we go down the stairs and walk slowly from cage to cage. There is a panther, too, ghost spots paling his oil-slick coat, a sleepy, bloated lion from Africa. But the tigers are awake and livid, bright with rancor. Stripe-lashed, shoulders rolling, they flank one another up and down the narrow causeway of rock, and the smell of them is sour and warm and fills everything. It will stay with me the whole day, even after I have had my bath and gone to bed, and will return at random times, at school, at a friend's birthday party, even years later at the pathology lab or in the drive home from Galena. I remember this, too, an altercation. A small group of people stand clustered around the tiger's cage. Among them, a boy with a parrot-shaped balloon, a woman in a purple coat, and a bearded man who is wearing the brown uniform of a zookeeper. The man has a broom and a dustpan on a long handle, and he is sweeping the area between the cage and the outer railing. He walks up and down, sweeping up juice boxes and candy wrappers, bits of popcorn people have tried to throw at the tigers. The tigers walk up and down with him. The woman in purple is saying something and smiling, and he smiles back at her. She has brown hair. The dustpan keeper stops and leans against the handle of his broom, and as he does so, the bigger of the two tigers sweeps by, rubbing against the bars of the cage, rumbling, and the keeper puts a hand through the bars and touches its flank. For a moment, nothing, and then pandemonium. The tiger rounds on him, and the woman shrieks, and suddenly the dustpan keeper's shoulder is between the bars, and he is twisting his head away and trying to reach for the outer railing so that he has something to hold on to. The tiger has the dustpan keeper's arm the way a dog holds a large bone, upright between his paws, gnawing on the top. Two men who have been standing by with children jump over the railing and grab the dustpan keeper's waist and flailing arm and try to pull him away. A third man jams his umbrella through the bars and pushes it over and over again into the tiger's ribs. An outraged scream from the tiger, and then it stands up on its hind legs and hugs the dustpan keeper's arm and shakes its head from side to side like it's pulling on rope. Its ears are flattened, and it is making a noise like a locomotive. The dustpan keeper's face is white, and this entire time he hasn't made a sound. Then suddenly, it's no longer worth it, and the tiger lets go. The three men fall away, and there is a splatter of blood. The tiger is lashing its tail, and the dustpan keeper is crawling under the outer railing and standing up. The woman in purple has vanished. My grandfather has not turned away. I am 4 years old, but he has not turned me away either. I see it all, and later there is the fact that he wants me to have seen. Then the dustpan keeper is hurrying our way, winding a piece of torn shirt across his arm. He is red-faced and angry on his way to the infirmary. At the time, I believe this is fear, but later I will know it as shame. The tigers, agitated, are lunging back and forth across the grate. The keeper is leaving a dark trail on the gravel behind him. As he passes us, my grandfather says, "My God, you're a fool, aren't you?" And the man says something in reply, something I know not to repeat. Instead, shrill and self-righteous in my lacquered boots, brave because my grandfather is holding my hand, I say, "He's a fool, isn't he, Grandpa?" But my grandfather is already walking after the dustpan keeper, pulling me along, calling for the man to stop so he can help him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful opening.
Thank you.
The Tiger's Wife is, at one level, quite a simple story about the girl who, as an adult, and she's a doctor, and her grandfather has recently died in slightly mysterious circumstances in an unnamed Balkan country, yes, where they're from, and she is trying to find out the circumstances of his death. But the novel is informed, too, by folkloric stories from the region, such as that of the Tiger's Wife, which is a woman who, well, as some of the villagers think, is the wife of a tiger and is going to bear a tiger's child. There's also a Deathless Man, a man who cannot die himself but brings death to others in a fairly gentle way. And Téa was born in Belgrade in the former Yugoslavia, but left when she was 7, I think,
Yes.
and via Cyprus and Cairo ended up in the United States when she was 12. So what I wanted to ask you at the start, you've lived half your life in the United States. You could have written a book about America. Why was it that you felt you had to deal with this past, this Balkan past of yours in your first novel?
I think there's a variety of reasons for that. One is that almost invariably when there's distance from an event, I think you can write about it and think about it a lot better. And what is sort of more distant than the first chapter of your life, really, when you get... my grandfather died about 8 or 7 months before I started writing this book. And I think that almost naturally brought the narrative back to my childhood, even though there are only some vague similarities between the relationship that Natalia has with her grandfather and the relationship I had with mine. It was something that very much drew me towards my own childhood. I've been told by other writers as well, and writers I admire, that without question and usually with much protest, your first book is about parts of your childhood. So I think that all these things, combined to make it inevitable.
Your grandfather must have been a remarkable man.
Yes.
And I think I read somewhere he gave you some advice once, which was do it right, don't mess around.
Yeah.
Do you just want to talk a little bit about him and how he influenced you?
Yeah. First of all, he didn't really use the word mess, but you can substitute whatever you like. But yeah, he was in my family it was my grandparents and my mom, so he was sort of the role of father figure all in one, and father figure and grandfather all in one, and we were very close. He was actually, the grandfather in this book is a doctor. My grandfather was an aviation engineer, and he built planes. And for better or for worse, I'm still afraid of flying, so I don't know what that means. Though he was a very good aviation engineer, it wasn't like historically I had cause to be afraid of planes because of his engineering. He had a very difficult childhood himself, and sort of against the odds in a country that didn't necessarily easily accommodate rising through the ranks from poverty. He managed to do it anyway, and that was one of the reasons why he felt that I should have an American upbringing and an American education, because he very strongly believed in the ability to do that in America, to really raise yourself up through education. So he was I admired him very much, and it was a very difficult time in my life when he died. It was also very unexpected. So yeah.
And that Balkan tradition it's very much it's not exclusively to the Balkans, but there's a storytelling tradition there, isn't there?
Yes.
An oral sort of history. Did that sort of give you lots of options as a writer when you were thinking about this novel?
I think so, but I think that that's another thing that sort of happened quite unconsciously. I've been, I was born in former Yugoslavia, but I did a lot of growing up in Cyprus and Egypt, and my childhood there is also something I think about very, very fondly. But all these three places, sort of after the fact, in hindsight, I'm able to look at this and be like, yeah, that's where it all comes from. Those places are all steeped in a storytelling that's very present in everyday life, and every story that gets told is an epic somehow. I mean, in Egypt, you have, ancient history coexisting with a more modern history, and somebody might live in a house which was a place where Napoleon may have stayed, during his time when he went through, but also that house may have its foundations built on the ruins of an ancient temple, or may have actual blocks from that were taken from the nearby temple when people were disassembling them to build their own houses, and that's something that gets worked into everyday narrative, and that's something that I grew up with. So I think that kind of folklore as everyday really made its way into my everyday state of being. Yeah.
As I mentioned, this book has had rave reviews around the world, and Téa has also, even before the book came out, made various lists, such as the New Yorker's lists of great writers who haven't been born yet, or was it great writers under 40, I think, wasn't it? So you were sort of an it, before the book came out, and the book came out, and that promise has been fulfilled, at least as far as the critical response is concerned. So I'm sure people would like to know, what does it feel like to be a literary sensation?
I'm very uncomfortable with these questions on a stage that has no wood to knock on. I see it, but it's just out of reach. Somebody get the post. It's been really wonderful, and it's been quite surreal. And I'm, also coming from the Balkans. I come from a culture and a family of just immense superstition. My grandmother keeps. When we come home, like when I go home to Belgrade, my grandmother will put a pair of scissors under the bed with blades towards the door to keep out evil, just in case. There's no harm, in hedging your bets, basically. Coming from a culture like that, to want something that, to me, is the absolute, and I have never wanted to do anything but write, and then have it, and then on top of it, have it be well received. To have a published book and to have it be well received, it's too much. I can't handle it on a cosmic, karmic kind of level. I have been brought up to believe that if something good happens, there is a cosmic toll booth down the road, and you're going to have to pay. And so I feel I'm trying to get off at the next exit before the toll booth. So. It's been surreal and wonderful. It really has. Yeah.
Great. Of course, some people say that toll booth is the second novel.
I'm putting on my blinker.
Are you? Obviously, I know that you are at work on something new.
Yes, yeah.
And do you feel the pressure to repeat the success that you've had, or are you still enjoying the success that you're having?
I'm very much enjoying the success that I'm having. Is it mine? No, sorry. Very much from the belief that the belief that it might be taken from me, but at the same time, the most pressure that I'm feeling right now, and this probably has to do with the fact that I'm still sort of knee-deep in The Tiger's Wife and promoting it, the greatest fear I have is that because writing The Tiger's Wife was something that happened very much as an emotional reaction to a tragedy in my life, that the next one will not come from as genuine a place, that I won't be as emotionally entrenched in it, that I won't feel the same way about it. I mean, there's people you date, and there's people you fall in love with, and it's kind of the same way, I think, with projects, and I don't want to be dating this project. I want this next one. So it's I think that that's my greatest fear and the greatest amount of pressure that I feel. But I finally, after a few false starts, arrived at something that I felt that I could, I felt I could commit.
So what you're saying, if I understand you correctly, is that it's more that you fear the second book will be much harder work because it's not a God-given story, as it were.
Not really. It's more of a fear. Yes, to some degree, but more of it that it will be hollow and unloved and that kind of thing. I mean, in a short story, I come from a background of short story writing. That's where I started. And in a short story where you start out with something, or at least, I mean myself as a writer, I would never dare to speak for other writers. In the past, when I've started out with a short story that I thought I could form an attachment to and then didn't, it's a short story. It's 16 pages, that's 2 days of writing for your first draft, and then maybe 2 weeks of working on it and finding out, no, this is not it. It's not going to work, and then putting it away for later. I suspect it would be quite a different story to find that out halfway into a novel. I mean, I suspect that would be a hair-pulling, eye-gouging kind of experience to be like, this is not real. I don't believe in it. I don't like it anymore. And that's what I'm really afraid of.
Because this novel did start as a short story, am I right?
It did. It started out as a horrible short story. it was I wrote it. I had just moved to Ithaca and started going to Cornell, and my grandfather had just died, and I was living a very snowbound, indoor kind of existence. And I watched a National Geographic special on Siberian tigers, and wrote a short story about a young deaf-mute woman who comes to a snowbound village in pursuit of her of the tiger that she used to perform with in a circus. It did very poorly in workshop. It was an outline. It was more of an outline than a short story. And my very good friend Alexei Zentner, whose book also just got published, I remember him making the comment in workshop, "This is not a good short story. This story has pitchforks in it. A short story should never have pitchforks in it unless it's Frankenstein." And this was very apt and very true. But I was attached to the girl, and I was attached to the tiger and the little boy who observed their interaction. And he became the grandfather of the narrator, and then it grew from there. That's how it came about. Yeah.
When Téa says Ithaca, she means in upstate New York, yes. Which just has the best place names, doesn't it? Ithaca,
yes, it does. It does.
Sparta,
yeah,
Athens.
Rome. Yes, yeah.
So it must be an unusual thing to suddenly, after working away at a book and having a few readers, i.e. your friends and family, to have so many readers. Can you talk a little bit about that experience of suddenly having this vast community of people who have read your book and want to talk to you about it?
Yeah, it's wonderful, and it's a wonderful feeling, and it's also sort of, it's got these lashings of disbelief in it for me, like just these threads and for the first month especially, I had a difficult time with the idea of people coming up to me like at a reading and saying, "I really enjoyed this part of your book," and then quoting part of it to me, or asking me about something that a character did, and I would have a moment of disbelief and suspicion immediately, like, why do you know this? How did you access this information? Because it's such a solitary, and for me especially, it was a very solitary endeavor writing the book. I wrote most of it, from the hours of 8 p.m. till 4 a.m. or 9 p.m. till 6 a.m. and it's been very unusual, sort of getting a larger readership. But that being said, it's really been really wonderful. And then, of course, there's that embarrassing moment where somebody will mention a part of the book or name a character, and I'll sit there with a completely blank face, which has happened once or twice when they attach to a character that I'm not. I'm sorry, I'm doing.
That's me. Sorry.
I'll attach to a really the reader will attach to a character that because I haven't written the book and worked on the book in at this point 6 or 8 months, or actually no, over a year. I won't have any recollection of what this is, and they'll ask a question. I'll be like, okay, and it takes me a while to get there. So that's the embarrassing aspect of it for me.
Just wait till they publish the 20-year anniversary edition, and you're asked to talk about that.
I'll have to reread it then. I'll have to be like, okay, revisit, yeah.
I was interested to hear you say a moment ago that you always wanted to be a writer. Yeah. As you said, your father was an aviation engineer.
My grandfather.
Oh, sorry, your grandfather.
That's okay.
Yeah. Where do you think this came from, this passion to be a writer?
I don't know. I think that it was, I always loved to read, and that seems like the most natural answer. I knew that I wanted to be a writer when I was 8 years old and living in Cyprus, and in order to be allowed to access my mother's laptop computer, I was supposed to do something productive on it. And the most productive thing at the time was to write or play Prince of Persia. And though I wanted to play Prince of Persia, it was writing instead. So I wrote a short story about a goat. I was new at English. Goat was a pretty good word. I liked the word goat. It had a swirly G in it, and other letters that were not the letter G. And I wrote it and took it to my mother and said, "I'm going to be a writer." And my mother, said, "Okay, that's nice." But that became the plan. And I loved to read. Books were an escape for me. And then the act of writing became an escape for me when I was a awkward child, and then an awkward teenager. So it was always something I loved, that act of it, the act of writing.
And do you still love it?
I do. I have, because the book was written during such odd hours, I have very hazy memories of writing it, but what I do remember, I remember enjoying it.
Now, is it true you wrote at least some of this novel in a Starbucks?
Yes, it is, yeah. I would write, there's 2 Starbucks in Ithaca, and one was right across the street from my apartment, and sometimes just to sort of get out of, during the early hours of the evening, I would escape my apartment and write in the corner. And that was where I met my best friend, Colleen, who is here on this trip with me, but not here. She's elsewhere. Shopping? Yes.
So next time you think Starbucks does nothing for the world? Talking about writing and being a reader particularly, I think when a writer has early success, people are very interested in who their influences are. So would you mind talking a little bit about the writers that you love to read and what sort of influence they have had on your own writing?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. As a child, I loved Roald Dahl, and I loved Rudyard Kipling. I had Just So stories read to me, and then I read them myself, and now I read them to my own brother, who's 10. He's a little boy. But I also loved, and I'd love to ask you, I loved Dick King-Smith. As a child, does anybody know who he is? Am I the okay? All right, that's good. I see people nodding. That makes me happy. All right, good. Because I've had trouble finding people who also read him, and that I have these moments of I know I have one of his books. I feel delusional. I loved his work too. And then as I grew up, I went through a phase where I really loved the Bronte sisters, and then I sort of branched off into darker fiction. I loved The Hunchback of Notre Dame by Victor Hugo, and that led me to Mikhail Bulgakov's The Master and Margarita, which I think is like one of the greatest books ever written, and cannot recommend enough. I loved Garcia Marquez, Love in the Time of Cholera, also just wealth. That's what it is. It's wealth. But then I also, more recently, I've gotten to love more contemporary writers. I love Hemingway, Raymond Carver, Raymond Chandler, Isaac Dinesen. Those are people that I love to read. And I guess when you live in a world that you're reading, when you really fully live in it, like that, it starts to sort of bleed into your own writing, which is I mean that kind of wanting to get that kind of energy into it, and that's what.
That's very interesting. So were there any moments when you were writing and you thought to yourself, oh no, it's Gabriel Garcia Marquez?
I would never think that about my own. I would, first of all, if I had any inclination whatsoever that my writing was anywhere near Gabriel Garcia Marquez's, I would never think, oh no. But no, I think that when I say influence and that it bleeds through, I think that there are moments in books that you love. There are moments that really, you really feel the moment, and it's something that you remember, and there's that, and in every book, every reader will remember a different moment that they love, that really, really affects them. And I think that it's the spirit of those moments that accidentally makes its way into your work. And I think that's inevitable. That happens.
Can you think of an example in your own?
I'm trying to think. I can't think of anything comparable in the book, but I think that I can. All I can say is the moments that deeply affect me, like the moment in Love in the Time of Cholera, where Florentino Ariza realizes that he's writing that in writing love letters and being hired to write other people's love letters, he is writing love letters to himself because both parties have hired him. That's a fantastic moment, and I think beautifully written. Those kinds of moments really stay with you. That's the thing that you remember about the book when somebody mentions the title. Yeah.
Now, so what sort of teenager were you?
I'm sorry?
What sort of teenager were you?
An awkward teenager. I was, dear God. I skipped grades. When I was in elementary school, when we moved from Yugoslavia to Cyprus, they skipped me a grade because I could do math really well. This, by the way, as like in first grade, that is when I could do math really well because I knew that 1 + 1 was 2, and now I would insist that it's 3. And then when we moved to Egypt a year later, they accidentally skipped me 1 more grade, accidentally somewhere in the paperwork. And I was a tall child, so I like really blended in. And by the time they realized it, they were like, just leave her there, just leave her. Like, we don't want to deal with more paperwork. So I was always 2 years younger than everybody else. There were awkward parts of my teenage years where my mother, deeply conflicted about the fact that that I had, that I was 2 years younger than everybody else, would not permit me to drive with other people in their cars because I did not yet have a driver's license, but I got my driver's license the day before I went to college. So this made social interaction extremely awkward. Like, everybody would arrive at the movie theater in cars, and then my mother would drive me there. So that is the kind of teenager that I was. Awkward.
I don't know whether this is from your teenage years, but it can't be that far away from them as you're so young. But I read a quote where you said, you were talking about death, and you said, I was extremely puzzled about death. I went through a crisis of trying to understand what the point of life was if we're all going to die. I think that's a dilemma that we all struggle with at some point in our life. Can you talk a little bit about that? Have you resolved it? Do you now think you do understand the point of life a bit better? And if it's relevant, is the Deathless Man of your novels in some way part of that process?
He was definitely part of the process of sorting it out for me. I intended him to be an extremely sinister character, and he ended up being sort of a lot more sympathetic and kind of laced with humor, and ended up being a very comfortable character to spend time with. On the page. And actually the Deathless Man sections are some of the least, those are some of the most original sections, because in the third draft of the book, I didn't redraft almost any of them. But in terms of struggling with it, I think that the question of death, when, my grandfather was the first person I knew who died. It wasn't like people who were sort of vaguely in the family, but not really close to me, had passed away. And it was a shock. And I was 20, and 20 going on 21, and I went through, I guess, when everybody struggles with the question of death, and then that struggle really comes down to a question of, what do you believe for after or not? I had been very straightforward in my belief that surely there must be an afterlife, and then I started to get very shaky on the grounds of that, and really went through several years where I was constantly in a panic about raw chicken, an accidental death. I would cross the street very, very carefully, and I was not. I think the people who had to deal with me were not very did not think I was very fun at that time. But no, I didn't really come to any sort of resolution about my feelings about it. I think that the book helped me understand, that my grandfather was dead and that was okay. But, I still have moments of absolute panic because I realized that, other people that I know are going to die, and eventually me too. And this is not, it's something that it's something that was very difficult for me, but is now less difficult. I don't know. I think the book has a lot to do with that.
Okay, I'm having microphone problems here, but it's all right, I'll just hold it. Thanks for that. And just on that character of the Deathless Man, I think I've read that you've said, a lot of people have said to you that he's their favourite character.
Yes. Yeah.
Does that surprise you?
I think it does. But I think that I'm sort of vastly surprised that people, know a character, much less have a favorite one out of my book. He's. I think that if I, as somebody who spent time writing the book, I think that he was, in some ways my favorite character too.
It strikes me that you've become, as we described you earlier, a literary sensation at an unusual time in publishing.
Yeah.
Because we're reading and hearing so much about the demise of reading and of books and of bookstores. And yet, you've just published this wonderful novel. I might just ask you, what your view is on the future of the book and reading, and do you see it as being something that's going to be with us for some time yet and give you a career?
I think that, the longevity of my career aside, I think that it's something that people have always been sort of, doomsdaying everything, every form of art forever. Like it's always the paintings are dead. Theater is dead. Everything is dead. Music is dead. The novel's been dead for 50 years. Like I can't remember. Somebody started announcing. So I think that people who love books will always love books, and that there will always be people who love reading. The form of that reading is starting to change. And for a long time, I was very anti-e-readers of any kind and extremely, oh, buy the book. And then I realized that the people, I don't read electronically myself. I can't do it. My eyes, whatever. But I realized that people who really love books will buy the digital copy, and then they'll buy the actual copy to put on the shelf. It's that way with music, and it's that way. I think that the book will live, and I think the book will live on, and hopefully for many more hundreds of years, thousands. So.
Thanks. I'm sure most people here would hope you're right.
You are all here. You were readers. That's amazing. That's awesome. Sorry.
We'll go to questions fairly soon, but another question from me. I mean, this book is set, of course, against the backdrop of the ongoing and historical conflicts in the former Yugoslavia, which is a pretty big topic. And I was reading a bit of it, refreshing my memory today. I'll just read this little bit and then ask you to talk about it. So you talk about your grandfather, and at this point he's still only a boy, about 12, and he's being told and hearing the stories around the village of the tiger's wife, and some of the extreme stories that she is, if not the devil herself, the devil's handmaiden, and she's impregnated by the tiger and that sort of thing. And then you write, "My grandfather listened without believing everything, with caution, with guarded curiosity, with a premonition that something inferior was going on in those conversations, something that did not include the horizon of his own imagination." I thought to myself when I read that, you've put your finger on something there, that often in these conflicts throughout history between humans, it seems to me that one of the things that we're lacking is not so much civility or politeness or love. It's a lack of empathy and imagination. Would you talk about that for a little bit, please?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. I think that I think that it's disheartening to, not just for this conflict, but for any conflict, to see, in a lot of what's going on in the world now, and then to look back historically and see what people used to do to each other, and realize that, perhaps in some regards we haven't really come that far. When I was my family lived in Germany for a while, and during my 20s, and I went to Rothenburg and went to the medieval torture museum, which is fascinating, and yet dates back again hundreds of years, and we've been torturing each other physically. People have been horrible to each other for a very long time. But I think that the process of learning can sometimes be can sometimes really be jet-packed by war. When these atrocities happen and people really become aware of it and sort of become largely aware of it in the media, then you take steps towards those things not happening again, hopefully. But I think that relating to the Balkan War specifically, I think that's a very apt passage to have read. I didn't even realize it until now. I think that I think a lot of regional conflict sort of worldwide has a lot to do with very complex relationships between groups of people, and that it's something that should be more cautiously approached. And I think that wow, okay, thank you.
That's right. And so, do you think the writer of fiction has an important role in recording these historical events and trying to help us understand them?
I think that I think that artists in general have the role of. I think that people always, whether it's readers or people who, love music lovers, or, the lovers of painting, I think that we always want to connect to something on an emotional level. And I think that we can attach to something on a clearer emotional level if it's fiction, if it's art, if it's music, as opposed to something that is presented to us just as fact, because through facts you don't really get stories, and it's story that you attach to, and story is present in almost all forms of art, and that's what. So I think that art is important in connecting emotionally to issues, but perhaps not the most important thing. Very significant.
I think that emotional connection is what is important, certainly.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to take questions in a moment. I'll just mention, if you're interested in a Sydney Writers' Festival session when Torture will feature, tomorrow I'm doing one with the Australian writer Peter Robb, who has a book on Naples, mainly in, I think, Naples of some time ago. Anyway, it's hard to... I have to read it again now. It's hard to turn a page without someone being put to irons and various things. Okay, questions? If you just wait for the microphone to come to you, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi there.
Hi.
I would like to ask you to explain how hard was to publish your book, and how that happened. Who discovered you? Who discovered your talent? Because yes, you are talented, that's obvious, but there are many, many young people around the world who are good writers, musicians, but their work never, comes to the wider public. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think that I do think that as with a lot of things, luck and timing has a lot to do with it. And you're right, a lot of people don't get the recognition that they deserve or struggle for. I had the fortune I went to a master's program at Cornell, and I was beginning to write some short stories, and not I was sending them out and getting sort of positive rejections, which are in the States, there's, if a magazine rejects your short story, they'll either reject it outright, or they'll send you a slip that's like, you just didn't make the cut this time, better luck next time, which, was very encouraging for me. And I was, but I didn't have a novel, and I didn't feel ready to publish, and I had just started this novel, and my friend, who had an agent, mentioned the novel to his agent. And then there was a bit of a scuffle about my not being ready, and I didn't want to, show any pages. And then I finally, showed the agent the pages that I had, and he signed me. And that was, and I mean, in America, that's the only way to get published, really. You must have an agent, because they're the intermediary with all publishers and magazines. Then the book, so I finished the book, and the book sold at auction. To Dial Press, and then to Random House, and then the New Yorker excerpted a part of it, and that was when it really started to head towards publication. So that was that was the journey. Thank you.
Questions? At the back?
I'm just curious about the legend of the tiger's wife.
Yes.
In the Balkans, that did the Balkans have tigers?
No, they didn't. And actually, one of the my friend is a doctor in the Balkans, and when I told her that I was writing a book called The Tiger's Wife that was set in the Balkans, she said, "You know," and because she knew I didn't live there, she was like, "You know that we don't have tigers, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, I know. That's okay." The tiger is the tiger in the novel is an escaped tiger from the zoo, and the episode is based on the actual bombing of Belgrade in 1941 by German forces when the zoo was demolished, and the zoo and much of the city was demolished. So that's where the tiger comes from. The myth itself is not really present in, it's really a fictionalized, sort of self-made myth that becomes the myth of this particular village. And I leaned heavily on the existence of regional myths in order to craft it. But it really sort of falls more into the category of Beauty and the Beast, which is the universal myth. So that's that. Thank you.
With the Deathless Man, there've been literary discussions, in newspapers and things about the Deathless Man bringing death, but I didn't see it as bringing death. It was the almost like preparing somebody for death, and I don't know how you intended it or whether. Which way did you intend that he brought the news of death and prepared people? Because I didn't find him an invasive person. I mean, like so many people, I thought he was so well constructed and exciting and mysterious and all these things.
You.
But I didn't see him as a harbinger of death or bringing death, but just bringing the news of death and staying with people and almost comforting them.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
so I think that he's not good news, and that's that's true. But the thing is, I think that for a lot of people, I think that because his character is seen so much through his interaction with the grandfather, we don't quite, as readers, get how much not good news he is.
Sinister.
Because he's never. He's always bad news for somebody else that's around, so I think that I guess to some people he would be a harbinger, whoever he comes for, it's not it's not a delight to have
not
him
good
there,
news.
right? Yeah, but at the same time, I think that he's not the bringer of death in any way, because he is not the one who selects; he's just the one who knows. And so I think that.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Hi. Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the creation of small characters that you make in your story. Like, I feel you make connections with just passerbys, characters that won't live in the story for more than a page or a paragraph. And I just wanted to know what the experience was in writing these characters that are just passerby characters for you.
I think that. Thank you for that. I think that. When I wrote Luca, who's the butcher, I did it more for myself to understand, because he was a very simple villain, and it was very, Roald Dahl in one of his essays on advice for writers wrote that the badder they are, the more fun it is to watch them fall. And I tried to do that exercise for myself, because I didn't feel that he was bad enough. I just said he was bad and didn't show it. And then something very strange happened, and he suddenly became a lot more complicated and not, it wasn't that he ceased to be a villain, but he just became sort of, somewhere there was like a thread of sympathy. And I liked the idea of opening the book up. So that was quite accidental, wandering into that small character's business. But I liked the idea of a world that exists off of the page. And that these minor people and it's true, like these minor people who walk into your life, you have no idea what they're going to do down the road and who they might become, and how in ways that you may not even understand and might never understand, they connect back to your life. I mean, that's sort of a scary concept. In addition, it sort of bridges with the concept of in how many other people's photo albums are you in the background? That's the, And so that was, that was how I came to that, and it was very fun. It was very fun to, make a small character who would then go on to do something significant down the line. I felt that it really made the world of the book more real for me, and hopefully for you too. I don't know. Thank you.
Philip.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I can repeat. Go ahead.
I just wanted to know how much research was involved in the whole project.
Okay. There was some research involved, and I actually did quite a bit of. In 2009, Harper's Magazine sent me to Serbia and Croatia to go vampire hunting. There was a sort of resurgence of interest in vampires due to this whole Twilight thing. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah.
Probably. No, I'm big. Yes. So they wanted me to sort of go back to the origins of vampires, which is sort of sourced in Serbia, kind of even more than Romania than most people would think. And the book was already written, and I had already done some research. I had gone home and sort of poked around and spoken to people about history, and my friend who's a doctor there had, filled in on the whole medical side of it. And then I went there, and we went trundling around in the backwoods from, village to village and sort of knocking on people's doors and saying, tell us about your local vampire legend, which turned out to be eerily similar to the unwillingness of people to talk about the tiger's wife in that particular, in the Galena thread of the book. And people's response to uncomfortable questions about their regional myths was stunning. Like, some people were extremely, were like open arms, like, let's drink, I'll tell you all about it. And then people, there were people who would slam the door in our face. That ended up, when I went home, I took the book back from my editor and said, I really need to do more with it. Like, now I have this connection to village life, to Serbia and Croatia, again, in a way that I hadn't felt before, and I reworked the book. So there was incidental research that ended up enriching a lot of the book. That's it. Thank you.
And did you?
Yeah.
Did you find a vampire?
We found. Oh my God! No, we found we found a lot of people who had at some point in their lives taken part in like that ritual of digging. There are people who have taken part in. I don't know who's read the book or not, but there's a part with diggers who are looking for a corpse. And people have taken part in similar rituals, and that was sort of interesting to find out. And then we also met a man who was, advertised to me as a storyteller, as like the village storyteller, but then turned out to be the village exorcist. And this was news to me, and he, through his stories, I realized that I was like, oh my God. And he had some very interesting stuff to tell. I can't say that I was, I didn't go there expecting to like find vampires or be creeped out, but I can't say that I was quite comfortable with his stories. And then the irony of ironies was that after we spoke to him, the naysayer in the group, who happened to be his brother, dropped dead that night, and we found that out, 2 days later, and it was sort of, it was an uncomfortable kind of thing.
In the middle here.
Right there. Thank you.
I just wanted to know if you still feel a very strong connection with where you came from, and how optimistic you are for the future of that area of the world which has sort of had so much misery and upset in the last 20 odd years. What you see as being the future for that area of the world.
Sure, absolutely. I think that I feel very optimistic because I think that my generation and the generation directly above us, and probably also the generation behind, they've had enough. There's a sense of rebuilding now, and that's very good, and that's very optimistic, and very promising. I'm very optimistic. That's very promising. Sorry, my brain. But as far as my connection to it, I feel, I was telling somebody earlier that I have this, I've been a nomad all my life, and I sort of feel loyalty in equal parts to different places where I've lived. Like, I feel loyal, I feel loyalty towards America, I feel loyalty towards Yugoslavia, I feel loyalty towards Egypt as well. And it extends to like these petty little things, like when somebody comes back from like a bad holiday in Croatia, I'm like, what do you mean you had a bad time? You have no idea what you're talking about, or, Egypt the same way. And so I think that it's sort of it's the nomad's loyalty to sort of your more selfish past, to yourself, really. So yeah, thank you. Thank you.
We only have a few minutes left anyway, so I hope we'll have Téa back regularly and she can develop a loyalty to Australia. It'd be a lovely thing. Because we do have just 2 more minutes, if there aren't any other questions, I'll just quickly ask you a final one that occurred to me when you talked about taking your book back to your editor. So that's the reverse of how it usually happens. How was the editing process for you? Did you have to lose anything that you cherished or was it a fairly gentle process?
It was I did lose parts of the book that I loved and felt very attached to, but I saw the value in losing them, and it's, you know, it was. I love editing, and I love editing myself, and then working with editors now, which has been something that I've just been doing over the last year and a half. It's so wonderful because you learn things about yourself as a writer, and you learn things about. You learn how to step back, like far, far back. I come from workshop, and in workshop you learn how to ask questions. But in editing, in editing for, like, editors ask completely different questions. In workshop, you question the believability and the reality of the world that you're trying to make. Editors accept that reality. They're like, all right, fine. This is the vision. This is the project. Fine. Now now how do you make it better? How do you make it more real? You know, if Tommy's buying eggs at 8 a.m., he's not buying eggs again at 8:10. Like, you know what I mean? It's the question of logistics, kind of, in a way. And I loved it. I loved learning to think that way from my editor. It was a great time. It was a great experience. It was worth the cutting off of, you know, artistic limbs. It was worth it. Thank you.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right, well, I think we're just about done. As I mentioned earlier, Téa will now be available to sign copies of her book in the Glee Books signing tent. Thank you very much for coming. Hope you enjoyed the session.
Thank you very much. Thank you.